The shovel hit something with a dull, wooden thunk, and when my little brother pulled it from the dirt, we found ourselves staring into the chipped, painted eyes of a porcelain doll. We were digging a hole for a new sapling in the far corner of the yard, where the old oak's shadow stretched long and the grass grew thin. The doll was filthy, caked in decades of wet soil that gave it a sickly, sweet smell of rot and earth. Its hair was matted hemp, its lace dress disintegrated into brown threads. But its face was perfectly preserved, its cheeks rosy, its lips a cupid's bow of red paint, and its eyes wide, glassy, and an unnervingly pale blue just stared. They didn't close when we tilted it. They just watched. My brother, Leo, thought it was a cool treasure. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. There was something deeply wrong about its expression, a vacancy that felt more like patience. Mom made us throw it in the trash, but the next morning, it was sitting on the back porch step, upright, as if waiting for us. Dad, a practical man, grumbled about raccoons and tossed it into the metal utility shed, sliding the bolt closed. End of story, he'd said. It wasn't. The next night, I woke up thirsty. The hallway floorboard outside my room creaked under my foot. I looked down. There, sitting neatly against my doorframe, was the doll. Its head was tilted, its unblinking eyes gazing up the hall toward my parents' room. A fine trail of dirt led back down the stairs. My breath hitched. I kicked it, sending it clattering into the wall, and locked myself in my room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I told my parents at breakfast. They exchanged that look, the one that meant overactive imagination. But the doll was back in the shed, the bolt still firmly shut. Mom, to placate me, took it and drove it to the town dump herself. That night, the creak woke me again. This time, it was inside my room. The moon cast a silver blade of light across the floor, illuminating the doll placed squarely in the center of the rug. It was closer. It was facing my bed. The smell of wet soil was faint but unmistakable. I didn't sleep. I just watched it. And its glass eyes watched me back, until the sun finally bleached the darkness from the room. Panic set in. We checked all the doors and windows. They were locked. My dad, his patience wearing thin, took the doll to his workshop in the garage. I heard the whir of a power saw, the sickening crunch of something being destroyed. He came out pale, holding a dustpan filled with porcelain shards and stuffing. He dumped it in the outside bin and washed his hands twice. We all felt a sense of grim finality. It was over. But that night, the sound that woke me wasn't a creak. It was a scrape. A soft, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the hardwood floor. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The scraping continued, slow, deliberate, accompanied by the faint patter of dirt falling. It was just outside my door. The doorknob began to rattle, not violently, but gently, as if someone or something was testing it. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to stop. When I opened them, I saw something then that I will never forget. A single, tiny finger, made of cracked and dirty porcelain, curled around the edge of my door. It was followed by another. They gripped the wood, and a single glass eye peered through the crack into my room. It was reassembled. The pieces were glued back together with a dark, tar-like substance, webbed with hairline fractures that gave its face a jigsaw madness. It was more horrifying than before. The rattling stopped. The fingers disappeared. I spent the rest of the night staring at the sliver of darkness under my door, waiting. This morning, I found it. It wasn't outside my door. It was in the hall, sitting facing my parents' bedroom. But it had moved. Its head was now turned completely around on its broken neck, its shattered face staring back down the hall, staring directly at my door, waiting for tonight. The notification on my phone was a simple motion alert, but the video clip it showed was impossible. It was me, standing perfectly still in my driveway at 2:13 a.m., staring directly into the camera lens. I'd been asleep, tangled in a nightmare where I was paralyzed in my bed, watching a figure that looked exactly like me move through the shadows of my own room. Waking up to that notification felt like the nightmare had bled into reality. The timestamp was exact. The figure was undeniably me wearing my same faded college sweatshirt, my same tired slouch. But the eyes were wrong. They were wide and blinking and vacant, like windows into an empty house. I checked the locks twice, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, and spent the rest of the night on the couch with every light blazing. I wrote it off as a bizarre glitch, a trick of the light, my mind stitching together sleepwalking and a digital error. But 3 nights later, it happened again. This time, the alert was from the camera overlooking my small, fenced-in backyard. My figure was standing in the middle of the lawn, its head tilted back as if staring at the stars, but its arms were held stiffly at its sides, palms flat against its legs. In a posture I never use. The video was 10 seconds long. It never moved, it just stood there. A statue of myself under the cold glow of the moon. And again, that night, I dreamed of being watched from the corner of my room by a silent version of myself. The dread became a constant tenant in my house, shadowing my every move. I started avoiding mirrors for too long, afraid of what might look back. I compulsively checked the camera feeds on my phone, my stomach lurching every time an alert popped up. They were always at night, always motionless, always staring with that hollow gaze. The final clip came a week later. This one was from the camera mounted under the eaves of the garage, pointing toward the side door of my house, the door that leads directly into the kitchen. The time was 3:03 a.m. In the dream, I was standing in my kitchen, drinking a glass of water, and I had the overwhelming, skin-crawling sensation that I was not alone in the room. The video showed the figure standing at the side door. It wasn't staring at the camera this time. It was turned toward the door, its head cocked as if listening. One hand was raised, not to knock, but pressed flat against the wood, fingers splayed. It was the most animate it had ever been, and that made it infinitely worse. It looked like it was waiting to be let in, or like it was checking to see if the door was locked. I shot up in bed, drenched in a cold sweat. The dream had been so vivid I could still feel the cool tile of the kitchen floor under my bare feet. The house was silent, a deep, waiting silence that felt heavier than normal. I had to check. I had to know the door was locked. I crept down the stairs, each creak of the wood like a gunshot in the dead quiet. The glow from the streetlights filtered through the blinds, painting striped shadows across the living room. The door to the kitchen was a black rectangle. I paused, my hand on the wall, listening. Nothing. I took a step into the kitchen. The towel was ice cold. My glass from dinner was still in the sink. Everything was in its place. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and moved toward the side door. My fingers found the deadbolt. It was locked, solid, secure. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. It was just a dream. Just a reflection moved in the dark glass of the oven door. I froze. It was me, standing in the middle of my kitchen, but I wasn't alone. Behind my reflection, another figure stood, slightly off-center. It was wearing my face, but its expression was one of calm, placid curiosity. It was the thing from the camera. It was in the house. It was standing right behind me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't turn around. Our eyes met in the dim reflection, my own terrified ones, and its empty, observing ones. It didn't move. It didn't smile. It just watched me, as if I were the fascinating anomaly. I am still standing here. I don't know how long it's been. Seconds, minutes, if I move. If I turn around, what will I see? What will it do? All I can do is stare into the dark glass, locked in a silent standoff with my own reflection, and the thing standing patiently over my shoulder, waiting to see what I do next. This is a story that still haunts me when I think about it, even though I was so young when it happened. 6 is around the age where a lot of my childhood memories start to become more clear. I have one sibling, my older brother, Keith. Keith is 2 years older than me, so at the time he was 8, and I was 6. I had a strict bedtime, 8:30 p.m. If I didn't abide by it, or our dad caught either of us up past our bedtime, we'd be in serious trouble. Our dad was always strict with us as kids. Honestly, I don't remember if this happened on a school night or not, but I woke up in the middle of the night to Keith shaking me awake. Keith and I shared a big bedroom upstairs in the house. My parents' room was on the first floor. I was confused why Keith was waking me up until he told me in a whisper to be quiet and listen. And I did. I heard what he was talking about. It was our mom's voice calling for us downstairs. But it was in a very quiet, whispery kind of voice. I was about to get up to go answer her, but my brother told me not to. He said he didn't think it was Mom. I told him to stop trying to scare me. I remember being so mad at him. He told me to go closer and listen. So I got up and went toward the bedroom door. Right outside our door was a little hall that led to the bathroom and another bedroom our grandma used whenever she stayed over. Directly to the right when you leave our bedroom was the stairway downstairs, which had a door too. I put my ear to the bedroom door and I heard the voice more clearly. It sounded like our mom's voice calling our names, Keith, Mikey. I said to Keith, "That's Mom," and he said, "No, it's not." Somehow, even as a 6-year-old, I found myself being the one confident enough to open our bedroom door and then listen through the stairway door. But now the voice had stopped. I whispered to Keith that Mom must have walked away. Again, he said, "That's not Mom." I kept telling him to shut up and that he was scaring me. I unlocked the stairway door and slowly pulled it open, trying not to make any noise. When the door was open just enough, I peered through the opening. At the bottom of the stairs, clear as day, was the silhouette of a person, a woman. But right away, I knew it was not our mom. Whoever it was saw me, because she said, "Hi, sweetie. Come down." Immediately, I shut the door and locked it, then ran back into our bedroom and locked that door as well. I started to cry, and Keith kept saying, "I told you." We both agreed to start screaming as loud as we could on the count of 3 to wake our parents. So on 3, we started stomping on the floor and screaming. It didn't take long for our parents to barge up the stairs, pounding on the locked door. At first, our dad was pissed that the door was locked. But as soon as we let them in and they saw I had been crying and we were both genuinely scared, they listened to us. My mom was particularly concerned. After telling us she was not at the bottom of the stairs and that she had not been calling our names, she asked what the woman looked like. But all we could say was that we couldn't tell, it was too dark. Meanwhile, I remember our dad running downstairs probably to look around for the woman. After a bit, our mom kissed us goodnight again, and I'm pretty sure she told us to lock the doors, which was a first. I was too young to catch on, but it felt like our parents knew exactly who it could have been. Keith and I looked out the window later when we heard the doorbell, and we saw a police car outside. We wanted to go downstairs, but we stayed put. I remember we begged our parents to tell us who it was and what happened, but they would always say they didn't know. They would also say they were proud of us for not going downstairs. Personally, I think they did know who it was, and to spare my brother and me from more trauma or fear, they just never told us. Because the last time I saw my parents for dinner, I asked them about it again and they still shrugged it off as some random intruder, but that never explained how that woman knew our names. This happened to me when I was 18 years old. I was on a trip with my parents and a friend of mine whom we can call Anna. This story takes place in Sweden when we were on a road trip. My parents, Anna, and I were going on a domestic trip, and we had an 8-hour drive from home. The plan was to visit a theme park and stay at a campsite, but we hadn't booked one. The day came and we arrived in the city where the theme park was located, but we planned to visit it the next day, so we needed a place to sleep. Since we had brought tents in our car, my dad searched online for a nearby campsite. He found one that seemed good and close by, so he called the campsite. Unfortunately, that day coincided with a big soccer tournament and the campsite was fully booked. Since we hadn't reserved a spot in advance, there was no space left for us. My dad called around, but we couldn't find any campsites that were reasonably priced and near the theme park. Our only option was to find a camping spot in nature. We set the GPS to the nearest parking area in a forest to avoid parking fines. Eventually, we found a spot in a nature reserve. When we arrived, there were some people around, so we asked if it was okay to set up our tents there and whether it was a good place to stay. A woman who was hiking told us it was a good place to sleep and that there were no parking attendants. Based on that, we decided to sleep in a small, lonely gravel parking lot. We were surrounded by forest and a 10-minute walk away was a beach. At first, we considered setting up our tents on the beach, but something told me it would be better to camp in the parking lot. As we got out of the car to set up our shelter for the night, I noticed a lone car parked further away in the lot. It looked like it was in bad condition and there was no one inside. I found it strange because it was already evening, so there were no more people at the beach or hiking in the woods. However, I didn't think too much about it at the time. I helped my parents set up our tents. They were sleeping in one tent while Anna and I shared the other, with both tents placed close together. After struggling to build them, we finally finished. Anna and I made our tent cozy, watched YouTube, and ate snacks. By this time, it was around 11 p.m. We wanted to sleep at a decent hour so we wouldn't be too tired the next day. After a while, around midnight, we decided to sleep. At this point, my parents were already asleep in their tent. Anna and I were scrolling through TikTok when we suddenly heard a metallic sound from the parking lot. It sounded like a shovel being thrown onto the gravel. We both jumped in fear and asked each other what it could be. Too scared to peek out of the tent window, we chose to stay silent and listen. The sound had come from the same direction as the abandoned car. We then heard what I assumed was a shovel being thrown into the car's trunk, followed by the trunk slamming shut. We sat in silence, our hearts pounding. Then we heard the car speed off, as if someone were trying to get away quickly. I texted a friend from a nearby city, telling him where we were staying. He replied warning me that the beach nearby was known to be dangerous, with organized criminals often engaging in illegal activities there. We had no idea about this before. When I read my friend's message, I felt cold and deeply unsettled. About 10 minutes passed in silence after the car sped away. Anna and I had started to calm down a little when out of nowhere, we heard the loudest, most blood-curdling scream from a man coming from the woods. We were absolutely horrified. I immediately texted my mom, telling her we just heard a loud scream. When she didn't respond, I called her phone to wake her up. She finally answered and said neither she nor my dad heard anything. She reassured me that it was probably nothing serious, but at that moment, I couldn't think of any normal reason for someone to scream like that. Anna and I crawled onto the blankets, terrified, not knowing what was happening. Every minute felt like an hour. Even though it was midnight, we were too scared to sleep. Suddenly, everything became eerily silent. Then my blood ran cold. I heard footsteps. Someone was walking around our tents, moving stealthily. Anna and I sat up, frozen in fear. I put my phone down so that its light wouldn't illuminate the tent. My heart was racing, and I could hear my own pulse. There was no logical reason for anyone to be walking around our tents in the middle of the forest at this hour. The footsteps moved around our tent first, then toward my parents' tent, and then circled around our car, which was parked nearby. The person stopped and seemed to be looking at our tents. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then I heard the same car from earlier returning. Its headlights lit up our tents and Anna and I quickly laid down to avoid being seen. I gathered the courage to peek through the small tent window. I saw the car door slam shut before it sped off again. I felt a brief moment of relief when the person left. From my vantage point, I could see the road they had driven down. 5 minutes later, I saw another car approaching fast. It was a police car racing in the same direction the other car had gone. Nothing else happened after that. Anna and I were still shaken, so we decided to sit in the locked car to feel safer. I stayed awake until around 5 o'clock a.m., keeping watch over the forest, while Anna eventually fell asleep beside me. After about an hour, we went back to our tent and, out of sheer exhaustion, finally fell asleep. We woke up around 9 o'clock a.m., completely drained. I told my mom everything that happened, and she revealed that she had also heard the footsteps. But when the person was near their tent, she had also heard heavy breathing, like the kind you hear in horror movies during a scary phone call. She had been terrified too. However, my dad had slept through the whole thing, so we had to tell him the story. Without hesitation, we immediately packed our things and the tents, eager to leave as soon as possible. None of us wanted to stay there any longer. Despite the terrifying night, we had a good time at the theme park later that day. However, that evening I decided to research the forest where we had camped. What I found made my stomach drop. Just a short time before our visit, a man had been murdered there, stabbed to death due to gang-related deaths. Even more disturbingly, 2 men had gone missing from that exact beach and had never been found. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if the person walking around our tents was a dangerous individual checking to see if there were any witnesses? What if we had been in serious danger without realizing it? Even now, I still think about that night. Who made that horrifying scream? And why was someone using a shovel in the middle of the night in a forest? And the police, what exactly were they chasing? I guess I'll never know. The sound that woke me wasn't a dream. It was the distinct, gritty scrape of a shovel biting into earth, followed by the soft thud of dirt being tossed aside, over and over again. I live on a quiet, dead-end street. My nearest neighbor is half a mile away. I stumbled out of bed, my heart already hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and crept to the window. The moon was full, casting a sickly silver light over my backyard. There were 5 of them, figures dressed in formless black, their faces hidden in shadow, moving with a slow, ritualistic purpose. They were digging 5 separate holes, each about 6 feet long and spaced evenly apart. Like graves in a new plot. The air coming through the window screen was cold and carried the rich, damp smell of upturned soil. I stood frozen, my hand clamped over my mouth to keep from screaming. This had to be a prank, a nightmare. But the cold window pane against my forehead was real. The ache in my legs from standing so still was real. The figures worked in perfect, silent unison, their shovels rising and falling. Then, the wind shifted, and I heard it, the whispering. It was a low, chanted murmur, just on the edge of hearing, a harmony of voices that sounded dry and ancient. I couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm was hypnotic and deeply raw. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers numb with terror. No service. The screen showed a single, flickering bar that died no matter where I held it. I was about to call out, to scream at them to get off my property, when one of the figures stopped digging. It straightened up, and though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was looking directly at my window. It tilted its head, the whispering from the others stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the sound. The figure that had looked at me raised a pale hand and pointed, not at me, but at the empty space in the center of their grim formation. The space where a 6th hole would go. A single, clear whisper carried on the cold air, spoken in unison by all 5 figures, their voices blending into one hollow sound. Next, I recoiled from the window, stumbling backward into the darkness of my room. I couldn't breathe. They know I was here. They were counting me. I crawled to the front of the house, peering through the blinds. The street was empty. My car was there, but the idea of running out into the night, past those things in my backyard, was unthinkable. I was trapped. I spent the night huddled on the floor in my darkened kitchen, listening to the relentless scrape, scrape of their shovels. The sound was a clock counting down to some unknown horror. Just before dawn, the digging stopped, the whispering ceased. A profound, heavy silence fell over the house. I waited an hour after the sun rose, too terrified to move. Finally, the need to know overpowered the fear. I crept to the back door, unlocked it with trembling hands, and stepped out onto the dew-soaked grass. The yard was empty. The holes were gone. Not filled in, gone. The grass was perfectly smooth and touched, as if nothing had ever happened. The only evidence was the smell, that overpowering, earthy scent of fresh turned soil, and 5 perfect, pale mushrooms arranged in a circle where the center hole had been. I thought it was over. I thought the night had ended it. But that evening, as the sun began to set, I found the first one. A single, long-handled shovel, caked with dark, damp dirt, leaning against my front door. There was no note. No message. It's getting dark now. The shadows are stretching across the lawn. And from my place at the window, I can see them. 5 neat piles of fresh soil, placed at the edge of the tree line. They're waiting. The shovels are gone from my doorstep. They're in their hands now, and they're just standing there, at the edge of my property, waiting for the moon to rise, waiting for the digging to begin again.